my steadfast guide, Polaris. I'm all in darkness, I'm all in darkness.
So you've just heard the opening of Hidden Star, the story of Annie Walker, performed by Megan Gauguin as the 40-year-old Annie Walker marooned in Australia, and soprano Susanna Davis as her younger self, with Marion Bell Caldwell on the piano. I'm Caroline Coetzee, and I'm the librettist and artistic director on the project.
I'm Rania Chrysostomou, I'm the composer and the musical director.
I'm Susanna Davis, and I'm singing the part of young Annie Walker.
I'm Marion Caldwell, and I'm playing the piano.
Unfortunately, Megan is ill and unable to be here tonight, so for the purposes of this presentation, we have modified and edited her parts, and they will be read by Caroline.
Read, I emphasize, not sung. And we hope you enjoy it. It's a mixture of performance and presentation, introducing you to Annie Walker and also to Hidden Star. And there's going to be an opportunity to ask questions and give feedback at the end. So, who was Annie Walker, and how did we come to write an opera about her? Back in 2023, my husband and I went for a walk to the old observatory, which is now part of the Institute of Astronomy in Cambridge. It's very close to where we live. And we noticed they were having an open day, so we decided to poke our noses in. And just as we came to the library, the librarian, Mark Hearn, was telling the story about a remarkable woman called Annie Walker, who lived and worked in the observatory, who had joined the observatory as a teenager in 1879 to work as a computer, and who, under the mentorship of the director of the observatory, John Couch Adams, had begun working as an observational astronomer, and she had recorded thousands of stars for the catalogue of zodiacal stars which the observatory was putting together. She had become the most highly paid woman working in astronomy in Britain at the time, and this whole situation was completely unheard of for a woman to be working as an observational astronomer. And so essentially what happened was the staff at the observatory were all getting very old and their eyesight was failing. There was one younger man who worked as an assistant, but his health was very poor. And Annie, who was young and evidently gifted, was able to step into his shoes as a more or less permanent substitute, assisting John Couch Adams and Adams' assistant, the astronomer Andrew Graham. However, in 1893, disaster struck, Adams died, and Robert Ball became the director of the observatory. And Ball was unsympathetic to Annie. He cut her salary increment and promoted younger men over her head. In 1903, the day Andrew Graham retired, Annie left the observatory, where she had lived and worked for nearly 25 years. She emigrated to Australia, never worked in astronomy again, and was quickly forgotten. And when I heard this story, I was fascinated and moved, and I also noticed that everybody else in the room was really gripped by the story and really moved by what they'd heard, and everyone was up in arms for Annie. And on the way home, I decided I wanted to create an opera about Annie Walker. So the first thing I did was, the very next day, I contacted Mark at the observatory, the Institute of Astronomy, to find out more. And what transpired was that actually not much more was known about Annie than we had heard the day before. But Mark was very excited by the idea of having an opera about Annie, and he enlisted the help of historian Roger Hutchins to dig out more information. Also very early on, I contacted Rania. We already knew each other, and I knew that her music was right for the project, that it is beautiful and sensitive, and Rania also shares my deep interest in projects about women. And so I was very confident that she was the right person to work with. This was a wholly chance encounter, but from it a whole new project has emerged. Roger and Mark have done a lot of research and have increased the knowledge and the understanding about the life of Annie Walker and some of the people around her, in particular the previous computer at the observatory who trained Annie, Harriet Hardy, who we're going to meet later this evening. They've published a new scholarly article about her life and her importance, and most movingly, an asteroid has been named in her honor. But despite all of this, the knowledge that we have about Annie Walker remains sparse. It's gleaned mostly from things like census records and other official records. It's fragmentary. We only have the framework of her life. For example, we know where Annie went to school in Cambridge, and we know the name of the head teacher of that school, but we know nothing else about the school, except that girls could do a senior certificate in mathematics there, which was very unusual at the time. We don't know how Annie, whose family lived in Suffolk, came to be at the school in the first place. We don't know when she started. We don't know what she was like as a student, or any of the details that you would like to have to give the life to an historical figure. So we've invented. And here is Annie, age 12 or 13. She's just started school. She's been educated at home up until this point. She's crept out on a dark winter's evening to look at the stars. Her head teacher has spotted that she's gone and has come outside and is trying to get her back inside, and Annie is trying to persuade her to join her in watching the stars.
Look, see how a lion strides the sky, and there the plough. Follow there, and look, oh,
So Annie's story, as I've said, really resonated with everybody in the room the day I went to the library, and resonated with Rania and me, and with so many people. So what we have on the quote here is from, the quote on the screen here is from Tanya Montero, who is a professor at UCL, and you can see in terms of somebody who is a woman working in STEM today, the importance of Annie and of people like her, female scientists from the past. For Rania and me, she's come to embody many, many things that are important to us. And Rania, very early on, you picked up on something that has become one of the driving forces behind the project.
Yes, that she isn't a hero, and that this story isn't a story about a tragic woman or a tragic story in any way. It's a heartbreaking story, yes. It's tragic that situations like this one, where someone's position is made impossible and they're forced to quit despite showing dedication and positive contribution, are happening so casually today, not just in academia, but in many sectors worldwide. And this isn't a story about a hero, as I said. Annie Walker didn't do anything that called for greater courage. Her actions were professional, intellectual, not mythical or transformative. The outcome reveals injustice and systemic barriers rather than triumph. But this is a story of a woman who picked up the torch from her predecessor and carried it as far as she could, defying the social norms at the time. She didn't even know how far she could go, and her predecessor told her that this is as much as you'll do. Women look down, according to her, or at least that's what she says. But Annie did more, and she did it quietly and effortlessly, as far as I understand the story. And was it out of sheer necessity? Was she lucky? Was she at the right place, the right time? We don't really know, I think. But Hidden Star, the story of Annie Walker, is the story of someone that's deeply devoted, not just to her craft, but to her career. And she cared very deeply for this. She was disciplined, committed, resilient, and gifted. And this story lets us say that though still observational astronomy is a field where women are outnumbered, she was the first of many to come. And Annie's story isn't one of triumph over adversity, but one of dedication within limitation, of someone who worked hard, contributed meaningfully, and was still overlooked. And this is a story of truth and alignment.
Indeed. And what struck me from the start, and I've tried to work it into the libretto as much as possible, is the fragility of Annie's position. Essentially, for her to do what was a remarkable thing at the time, to be a woman doing a man's job, and as Rania says, without any fanfare, without any kind of standing up for her rights, just doing the job, she depended on John Couch Adams. And once Adam was gone, she was so vulnerable. And this really resonates with me, this whole question of the sustainability of change. Annie, as a woman in the late 19th century, and not just as any woman, but she was from a working class background, she didn't have huge financial means. She was reliant on insiders in the existing power structures to enable her to advance the way she did. And when she lost that insider support, the whole thing crumbled because the structures that she worked in hadn't changed. And this, for me, feels very relevant right now, at a time when we see social change from the past decades that feels, I don't know, sort of less secure and really under threat. Anyway, to move on and find a little bit more about just how special and unusual Annie's situation was, And also to give a bit more of a picture of the environment that she was working in, I spoke with science historian Eva Kaufhold-Soldat.
Eva. I'm a historian of science, or more particularly a historian of mathematics, and I work at the University of Koblenz. And in the last years, I've developed an interest in the history of astronomy, which for a long time was a part of mathematics, and only began to separate itself over the course of the 19th century and became a discipline in itself. So, and I've been working on women in mathematics and astronomy for quite some time now, yeah.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit more about what you talk about women in mathematics and women in astronomy in the 19th century? Who were these women and what would they have been doing?
So there's actually a dichotomy. In mathematics, you will not find many women because mathematics was a discipline where women were not very welcome in the 19th century. You will find individuals at some points. In astronomy, it was quite different. There were better chances to be employed in astronomy or to at least participate in astronomical research at the time, because astronomy had not become a professional science by then. So there were certain loopholes that women could make use of to participate in astronomical research.
And what would they be doing, these women? I mean, I've been throwing around terms earlier like computer and observer without really explaining them. Can you give us a little bit more of an explanation about that?
Okay, there are different kinds of work that women do in astronomy. So there are, of course, the helpers. You might have heard of Caroline Herschel. She was the sister of the very famous astronomer Herschel, and she helped him. So that's the official term that was used when she did observations on her own. But when we look at observatories, it's very much different, because over time there starts to emerge a certain hierarchy. There are observers and there are people who do calculations. So there are people who look at the sky and there are people who interpret data, and those would usually be men. And then you have a job that's not very well paid, and it's a very difficult job to do, and this is to do calculations. So for example, if astronomers would do observations, computers would calculate star positions based on these observations, and those in many cases were actually women.
But it was very unusual for women to observe in the context of an observatory, is that correct?
That is super unusual. We have this case, there's a famous case of two women who were employed in Greenwich, but that was at the end of the 19th century. And I always thought they were the exceptions because usually women were banned from doing observations. And people argued that they were too fragile because these observatories were cold, it was in the middle of the night. It was also argued, of course, that they were not able to do scientific work because that was a big difference that people saw. Calculations were just something that you could learn how to do, whereas doing observations was seen as scientific work, as a creative work, and people thought only men were able to do this. So in almost all cases where women were completely banned from using the telescopes and the other machinery.
So in that sense, Annie Walker in the 1880s being employed in Cambridge as an observational astronomer is really unusual.
It is super unusual, and I'm quite puzzled. I had never heard of her before you contacted me. And it's actually something that's very counterintuitive to me. It's something that I would have never expected to encounter. And she was paid.
And she was
And
paid.
then, because when we talk about these women at these observatories, but if there were computers, they were usually paid, but they were badly paid. But to have it, and sometimes women were allowed to use like old instruments. There's the case of Dorothea Klumke, who was allowed to use a broken telescope or a not very functional telescope. But she was, of course, not an official employee at the observatory. But to be an official employee, that is something that makes it, official and visible in a way. At a time when we're usually pushed to the background. So that is also very interesting that they have her on the payroll as an official employee. That is something, I mean, there are these other women, Annie Maunders, for example, but I think she's quite the singularity of the time.
That's really interesting and that's really helpful, Ava. That's been absolutely great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so sorry I can't be there. I hope you have a great festival, and I wish you all the best, and I look very much forward to seeing the opera.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Hi, I'm Eva.
Don't know why it does that.
So we've just heard Eva talk about computers. Harriet Hardy was a computer. She was actually the computer who worked at the Cambridge Observatory and trained young Annie when she got there. And this scene that you'll see straight away, John Couch Adams has already introduced the 15-year-old Annie to a skeptical Harriet as a mathematically gifted helper. Throughout their interaction, Annie is a bit reserved, holding back, quiet, and taking everything in, while Harriet is a little bit more sarcastic, maybe.
Well, Miss Watchful Eyes and Mathematical Gifts, are you ready to be plunged into a world of numbered drudgery?
I'm sure I don't know, miss.
Did our good friend there, Professor Adams, explain to you the nature of our work?
Not really, miss.
Reduction. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? Every night, the old men. Every night. Every night. Every night the old men watch the skies and map the stars. Every night Every night the old men watch the skies and map the stars by eye and ear and count. By eye and ear and count. By eye and ear and count. Looking up, looking out, looking up, looking out. And every day we young women do the work, we do the work that gives each star its true position. Looking down, always down, invisible, unseen. That's reduction, Annie.
Miss.
Don't get your hopes up, Annie. It's dull work for small reward. Yes, miss! But miss! What shall I do? So a quick explanation of the two photos that you've just seen, one of which is still on the screen. The first photo you saw was Andrew Graham, the person whom Annie assisted, himself observing at the observatory during the time that Annie was there. This photo does not come from Cambridge, or not from Cambridge, UK anyway. It is from Massachusetts, from Harvard. These are the Harvard computers who were working at around the same time as Annie and Harriet, and they are representing our young women. And you're seeing this photo because the sad fact is that we don't have any photos of Annie, or indeed of Harriet. So you have these two really interesting women about whom we know very little, not even what they looked like. We know that they were 19th century career women. Neither of them married, they both had careers. And yet we know very, very little about what they looked like. And one of the fascinating things about discovering these characters, or about writing the libretto, has been discovering these characters and giving them voices. And the voice that's on the screen now is a current PhD student at the Institute of Astronomy, and the reason why I love this quote is because, quite unprompted, Stephanie voiced exactly what I was thinking when I wrote a line that you'll hear Annie sing in a little bit, for in the numbers I can see the patterns of the stars. And that was very validating, because when I said discovering the characters, actually what I mean is creating them, inventing them. This is history, and these are real people. And with the men, we know lots about them. We know lots about every single man in the story. Not just about who they were and what they did and when they did it, but also about their personalities and their interactions with other people. But with the women, no, not at all. And in a way, from a creative perspective, that's actually great because you aren't constrained. So just one choice I made when I was writing the characters was not to write a pastiche of Victorian English, although I have tried throughout to avoid anachronisms, both in the wording and in the rhythm of the speech, but it's more of a suggestion of the Victorian period than an imitation. And with Annie and Harriet and Miss Thirlborn, the head teacher, I created my own backstories. I gave them personalities, I filled in gaps, I answered that question, why was Annie sent to school in Cambridge? And why was she left there when her family was moving on? And I thought a lot about what they might have been like, what they could have been like, to the point where it became, for me, what they were like. I feel as if I really know these people. And I find myself saying things like, Annie must have had so much in common with John Couch Adams, and then I realize that it's actually my Annie I'm talking about, and for all we know, the real Annie might have been quite different. So I do all this creative work, making these characters and turning them into poetic language, and then of course I hand them over to Rania to compose the music.
Yeah, which is super exciting to work on this opera, especially because it's character driven. I go by the libretto, we talk about it with Caroline, and then I have to have my own answers or my own questions, and it's to find the essence of each character and see where they are, where they're going. Do they know what they want is one question that I had to answer, especially in the area that you're going to hear in a little bit, where Annie tries to vocalize and say what she wants, but before she goes there, she tells us what she doesn't want. And how do you capture that duality of knowing what you don't want exactly, but not really having those terms of saying, I want to be an observational astronomer, if that was even what she wanted to do. And she couldn't say that because she was the first person who did it later. So at age 17, she couldn't have known. So that was it. To write for John Couch Adams, luckily we have this picture, and I had this picture on my screen, and I tried to imagine what that face would sound like, and I have theories for that I'd love to share later. Harriet and Miss Thirlborn, they were exciting to compose. Harriet specifically, because you've already heard her, I'll tell you about her. She's quite angry in the libretto, frustrated. And I had to layer up these frustrations and angers so they make musical sense. And each time she appears, she knows something more, but she's still angry. So how does that come out in the music? It's something that I loved finding out. So now we're going to hear one of these areas. 17-year-old Annie and Harriet, they talk about their lives at the observatory, and they both find it very different. So Harriet doesn't like it there, Annie would love to stay there. And Harriet has just challenged Annie, who she admitted she wanted to stay at the observatory, and Annie responds quite bitterly.
not alone in feeling thus. But this is drudgery dressed in numbers. Lonely. Lonely all the time. Between a little room to work, another room to sleep. Lonely. So lonely. No time or space for friends. Lonely. So lonely. You say you will not serve, but this? What is this? Drudgery. A life of service to old men. Drudgery. All drudgery. Old men who do their work who cannot do their work without us, while we remain invisible.
No, Harriet, it is not like that for me.
This is the Cambridge Observatory at the time that Annie and Harriet lived and worked there. And I chose this slide particularly because this wing on your left is the residential wing, where they lived and where, well, first Harriet and then Annie, and where Harriet was so lonely. And of course, it's also where the science happened, the astronomy and the mathematics. And this was one of the biggest challenges for me in writing the libretto. How do you embody the science in poetic language, not just as itself, but also to represent somehow Annie's experience of doing the work? And this was very difficult. It was a big challenge for me, and it took me a long time to reach something that worked for me, and I think for the opera. And that was when I realized that the old eye and ear and count method that you heard mentioned earlier of astronomy, which Annie practiced while observing, relies very heavily on the observer internalizing the rhythm of the clock. The telescope lens has a grid on it, the stars pass the grid, you have a clock and a person keeping time, and based on the position that the stars are at a particular time, their position in the heavens is calculated. And this whole idea of the rhythm of the clock felt very, very similar to me to the way in which musicians internalize meter and rhythm. When you actually breathe the music and live the rhythm and the meter of the music. And I channeled this into the central scene of the opera, where we find Annie alone on stage, engrossed in watching the heavens. Breathe, count, observe, watch the wires, watch the stars. My breath becomes the rhythm of the clock. My heartbeat slows until I'm one with time. Hold the rhythm, hold the count, breathe, count, watch. Outside the world is dark, asleep. Nothing stirs. Within this little space, we breathe, count, watch, and still the heavens wheel. The stars turn past my wires, and I remain precise, steady, each second, each fraction of each second pulsing through me.
So, what's next? It's to complete the opera.
And as well as completing the opera, we want to share the knowledge that we've gained and to give Annie her rightful place in history, and also to share why we think her story is so important. And to do that, we're partnering with the Institute of Astronomy to offer workshops for children, for young people, and for adults, exploring Annie's life and what it means for us today, and these workshops will run alongside performances. Our first goal is the Cambridge Festival next March. We're actively fundraising right now, so please do get in touch if you want to contribute, or if you know people who might be interested in the project, especially people with lots of money. But for now, we want to give Annie the last word. At the end of the opera, we return to the adult Annie of the opening, lost, depressed, and angry in Australia in 1903. But now we move on, as Annie looks forward to her uncertain future. Perhaps there is a way. I can still read, still see. Maybe. Can I forgive the wrong committed? 9 years of hurt, seeing my work diminished, the younger men appointed in my place. My faith, my father's, mother's, brother's, sister's faith, says yes to turn the other cheek, continue on my way. But it is hard, so hard, when every way I've turned for all those years, the doors to the stars slammed in my face. Perhaps I could continue here, work as a computer only, quiet, beautiful, subdued. But no, my pride, my knowledge of my worth will not allow it. So how to make my way, to open my own doors? I know there is a world where women seek to have another life, so why not here? Not now. Not I? I can still read, still see. In France, I read, a woman went in a balloon to watch the stars, and in America, women make discoveries. Even in England, which did not treat me well, women make their own way, moving from computer to observer, as did I. But now, what could I do? What's open to someone like me, 40 years old, alone, without the luxury of wealth to open those slammed doors? In Cambridge once, at church, I gave a talk about the moon. People liked it, laughed at my small jokes. Oh, I was so nervous, but then enjoyed being the one who knew, was listened to. Could I find a new place where my experience, my gifts are recognized, where I can share my knowledge, be respected, find a way, where I'm not Adam's friend and helper, Graham's patient, quiet assistant, but simply Annie Walker, astronomer?
Well, Caroline promised that Annie Walker would have the last word, and it's not true, because my name's Bill. I'm artistic director of Tete the Opera Festival, and I'm really grateful to the four of you for doing that. The year began with the intention to do the full opera. We haven't got there yet, and you had some strong encouragement for me to just do something. And I love it. I don't know about you guys, but I think I love seeing inside a process, and in something with so much information behind it, I find it absolutely fascinating. Anyway, I volunteered myself, bad luck, to lead a discussion if anybody has anything to say. If you don't, I do, but let's see if any of you do first. Any hands up?
What strikes me as really fascinating about this is that you've got this character of Annie that you don't know very much about, but you've got this profound impact that it has had on women, and particularly women working in the field since. And if you are doing things like workshops and educational things, for me, it would be an integral part of the story to also explore the legacy that she has had, and like what this and what, like I love it when the process lives itself like sort of like within the work, and therefore like I'm thinking about like a young Annie, and I'm thinking about like another character who is wanting to become an astronomer in 2025, and I'm thinking about like the sort of like the contrast between those two things, and how and how the things that the characters think would like change over time. And I'm thinking about the Zoom call and how interested that person was to learn about the fact that there actually had been somebody on the payroll at that point, because it was just and those to me are like the really interesting bits that I think could become fundamental to the piece, and I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, I think we're completely in agreement with you about that. That's really very much what we're looking into, and it's so interesting because, of course, depending on the age of people taking part in the workshop, the story is slightly different. For younger children, we don't want to tell a big story of what's effectively constructive dismissal and the destruction of somebody's life. So it will be, we're thinking about stories about this girl who became an astronomer. And as I say, working also with the Institute of Astronomy on all of this, so it's tied in with the science of the stars now. For older teenagers, absolutely, this thing of, what was it like and what would you do now? And I think the joy of this, and part of why the Institute is so interested, is because we're weaving together the art and the science, we can attract young people who might be interested in astronomy but have never thought about music, opera before, and people who are interested in singing and arts and haven't really thought about the astronomy before. So there's a huge amount to explore and unpack there. But yeah, that's very much.
Good. Anyone? There's no one up there, Leo.
I was wondering where you're intending to take it. I mean, I'm assuming that's dependent on the sort of funding you're pursuing. Is it exclusively going to be for the university, or
No.
what's the plan?
Well, the place that we are planning on performing the whole opera is at the Cambridge University Festival this March. So hopefully by then we'll have enough funding in place to have that. But the hope is that we will take it further to other festivals in England, maybe in Europe. That would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add in for you that a very early idea I remember from the beginning of this project was this rather, I thought it was a lovely idea that children's voices would be the stars.
Yes. Yes.
And that, I mean, to begin with, I was going, oh God, we're going to have like chaperones. But actually you had quite practical answers to that, didn't you? They can record. I hope that's still in it, is it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's part of taking it to the schools in Cambridge, at least for now. We will also have a piece where they will learn as part of this project. We'll record it, and then hopefully we'll be able to use that recording to accompany all other performances that we will be doing.
Yeah, I think if I was 6 years old and I was the star, and actually I believe it as an audience member as well. There's something about that's more interesting. How is it for you being a real person that you have no information about?
It's really interesting because I think I actually found the way her character was written quite heartwarming, more realistic, I'd say, as a sort of product of her time. With such skill and deeply intelligent, but of course that it was all taken into nuance of she was a product of her time. So I was just trying to do that justice by not just throwing myself at it too much, because it's very musically innovative. So it's hard not to feel like this sort of driving force and almost like this inner rage that seems to be building up from her suppressors, but at the subdued Annie presentation. But yeah, I found that really.
That's
really
good. So you had a lot,
thing
because
to-
usually when you've got very little information, it's really hard to make a character. That's really nice to hear.
Yeah, and I think the way Caroline portrayed it through the words and musically, it just seemed to gel so well. It made sense. It was quite easy to grasp what they were getting at with her character, and they've done such deep historical work on it too that you can see the backdrop of what was going on for her. And I mean, you got a glimpse today of the different ages she's going through, and hopefully with adding more of the opera to that, you can see more of the nuances therein of how she does grow within these constraints and societal pressures to be, looking down, being a computer, punch the numbers. So
Yeah, I was going to say, over here in the orchestra pit, you've got the job, haven't you, of you're presenting the entire universe
Yeah.
at the same time as the confines of this slightly sort of drudgery, and
Yeah.
in a way, she obviously didn't think it was a dull job, but on the time.
I think I found that very moving because yes, there are like the beginning, which I didn't say live, of course, in the recording, but the hands are so far apart.
Yeah.
High up and low down, which feels
And you were being
very
everything, weren't
universal,
you?
yeah.
But by this time, you were
But
like,
this, yeah. But I think I found it very moving, and I think something about the characterization is as soon as we met in the first rehearsal and started looking at the music together and heard a little bit more about Annie, I found it very moving as well, Annie's journey, because it wasn't a simple progression. She progressed, but then it was almost like, as she got older, it was as if the world wanted to make her smaller, and her having to find herself again. And I found that very moving, and I think that musically it seems to carry through.
well, she was absolutely in her element, and then deflected, wasn't she? That, you know, she was where it sounded like she was where she wanted to be. I know Harriet was lonely, but
Well, we believe Harriet was lonely, but we know about Harriet since
Yes,
she left the
yes.
observatory. So I think there are some more questions in the audience.
yes, I was just going to
Sorry.
say.
I love the fact that you were playing the part and it was and it was, you know, spoken word, and I love the contrast, and I love you coming in and out of character, and I hope that in a way it felt quite universal, and it felt quite present now still as people. We have that loneliness, I think, especially post-pandemic, and it just had such a lot of cultural contemporary resonances as well. So I hope that kind of part of it can. I find it fascinating. I love this like lecture opera idea. Christmas, you know, the Royal Christmas. You know, it would be a cool concept to put it in a lab like that. You know.
Have we got any more out there? I've got more questions otherwise. Okay, oh goodness.
Sorry.
Three of you at once. Do you want to like order yourselves? Is that really risky thing?
Sure. Well, I know it's been a very collaborative, creative process. I think you touched on it a bit, but I don't know if especially Marion and Susanna want to say a bit more about your like creative input into the development of it.
I'm not quite. There were so many things. Creatively, I just wanted to push myself as much as possible, because that's the great thing about contemporary music. You try new things with your voice that you never have before. So for me, it was more a test of stamina and persistence with like the musical intention behind it, and just really committing to it. Because I think at first I was quite tentative, because you get intimidated when you, in my case anyway, have perhaps not had as strong a background in contemporary music. So giving yourself up to that is actually quite a liberating thing, to almost just like, well, you take it as a new slate. But
yeah, and hopefully a learning thing as well.
Of course, yeah, no, so much.
And how about you?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it, because it's while playing a composer's new work always feels a little bit frightening beforehand, because you don't want to mess it up for them. But I love the feeling, like I'm always struck with the new music that you look at it and it looks so static on the page, especially some of the writing is quite sparse, you know. So, but then as soon as we met Rania, and there's that feeling of flow, or what's trying to happen. I remember in the first rehearsal, you were explaining what you kind of wanted rhythmically and the way you heard it, and so it's been a really lovely process, and I felt like there was a lot of kindness through the whole thing.
Well, has it worked that much?
Yeah, if I can just add to that from our perspective. So just to be clear, we had one rehearsal in June when we recorded the opening, which you've now heard, and then one rehearsal last week. That's it. But especially that rehearsal in June, I mean, last week was a little bit more focused on what are we doing in 4 days' time and how are we going to do it.
Which is very good for you.
But really, I think it felt very much like a two-way process, that Megan and Susanna and Marion were trying out this new music, and I mean, I remember how tentative you were at first. But that sort of fed back into our process going forward that we took from you. We could see it's not as simple as what worked and what didn't work. It all pretty much worked, but it just felt like a lovely collaborative atmosphere. And since then, whenever we've talked about where we're going with the music and the libretto next, we've been referencing what happened on that day.
Well, that's just almost exactly what I was about to put to you, Rania, which is what is it to hear your music? Because it's slightly different. When you hear it then change.
When I play it on my laptop, it's fake instruments. And then you hear it, like first of all you hear the words come up, and the way Susanna sung it, the way Megan sang it that we heard in the intro, it just gives it life. The way they say each word, and it has a different gravitas. And then Marianne can actually color the music she's playing without having to tell her anything. And it just becomes, where you hear it like a line, then it becomes like a whole sphere of sounds, of things happening at the same time, and you hear the nuances, and you hear every little thing come out, and it just gives it life.
Yeah, and I hope that then when you go back to do more, you're more informed.
Yes, I am actually. That's a good point, because now I know how each person sounds, especially the singers, because I don't sing. I need to feel better if I know them, and then I can hear whatever I write in their voice.
And without hearing that, I thought we must congratulate you on the words. Because it would be such a pleasure that we can actually hear what you're on about.
Yeah, thank you.
Now we've still got two of you, haven't we, over here? Are your questions still bubbling?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the writing, what you think the value and the importance is of reimagining stories from history where maybe the historical lens was pointed somewhere else, like for women in science.
Yeah.
And this, I don't know if I lob something else at you, which we were talking about this afternoon and not tonight, which is it may yet be that you discover in research the story that you didn't want to tell.
Exactly. I think this is the big worry, is that part of what we're raising money for is to do some more research, to go into particularly archives in the Cambridge Library. We know there is at least one letter from Annie there where she says she wrote to Robert Ball saying, I am desirous of continuing to support astronomical work. And as far as we know, never got a reply. And those words I put into the opera, and they're the only words in Annie's voice, other than a few little notes from her star observations. And I think that's kind of the worry, is that you find out something that contradicts what you've written. It hasn't happened yet. I mean, the story has changed, and I think that's been the joy of working with historians, is that initially, when Mark told the story, it was a very simple story of misogyny, that Ball had tried to get rid of Annie because she was a woman, and he was less socially liberal than John Couch Adams, who really supported women in science and women in education. However, then transpired through the research that followed that firstly Ball has tried at least to support some other women into jobs in astronomy unsuccessfully, and that he ran or was involved in women's astronomical expeditions, and in fact what Ball was doing was trying to get rid of everybody at in the observatory who had worked with Adams, not least because this old eye account method was way out of date, even in the 1880s. And so he was modernizing, and he did it in a terrible way. There is absolutely no doubt that he treated Annie extremely badly. But that's the kind of thing where you have to, so my original thought with the libretto was somewhat different. For example, in the way that I was planning on writing Ball, the scene with Ball is now a scene between two people, one of whom is bulldozing over the other one in the form of change, and we never see Bourne on the stage, we hear his voice off stage. And Annie simply does not understand what's happening for a large part of it, which I think is an experience that one has. And I think that's the other thing, just coming back to the original question about these historical women, is that of course you're writing in the experience of people you know or experiences that you've had yourself. That was why the science was so difficult for me, because I'm not an astronomer, I'm not a mathematician, so how to represent that? But yeah, it is trying to honour the history without representing it exactly, I think would be what I've tried to do in the libretto.
Interesting, and we must let you get to the bar, but I think, I'm sorry Leo, I think we owe you the last question, because you haven't had one yet. If it's still there.
Yeah, so I have a more speculative question about the story which Tom was just talking about, which is why, for your version of Annie, why do you think she went to Australia? Because one of the things that really struck me looking at the pictures is that the stars in Australia are completely different to the ones in
Yes. And that's something, I mean, harking back to the very beginning, that's something that I've used as a metaphor for her state. The answer to the question why she went to Australia is, we kind of know, but not really. Her family had gone bankrupt, and they immigrated to Australia in the 1880s. She did have a sister who lived just up the road in Streatham near Ealing. So to my immediate thing is, well, why didn't she go to the sister? Why go all the way to Australia? In my mind, she wants to create a complete break. She has the opportunity because the family is there. And she just wants, the experience has been so traumatic that she just wants to put the biggest distance possible between her and it. This is completely unfounded in historical fact. For all we know, her mother was ill or whatever, but that's my feeling. And I'm so glad you raised that thing about the sky's different, because that's the metaphor that I use. There are two metaphors that I use in terms of Annie's experience in Australia. The first is that the skies are very different. The constellations, Orion is upside down. You can see Orion in both the northern and the southern hemisphere, but it's the wrong way around. The moon is the wrong way around. It's from personal experience, it's quite disorienting. And the fact that she's lost Polaris is used, the North Star is used as this guiding star, as this metaphor throughout. And she's now lost that, and she presumably doesn't know to look for the Southern Cross. And Marion and I, both from South Africa, and we've both experienced the opposite, that you lose the thing that you map the heavens around. The other metaphor that I've used is the difference between looking at the sky as an astronomer and looking at the sky as a child. The first Annie we meet sees the sky as a child. She sees constellations. She's been taught the constellations. By the time she's been an astronomer, that's not enough anymore. So when she says, like a child I stand under unfamiliar skies, at the first two lines of the opera, that's kind of building all that in. And there is a little bit of, what on earth have I done? What am I doing? One interesting thing, though, if I may, just before we finish off, the really interesting thing, and the reason why I ended the opera with the words, and it's a question, is there a way for me to be Annie Walker, an astronomer, is because she immigrated in 1903, and right up till 1909, she describes herself in the Australian census as astronomer, and we know she didn't work for the Melbourne Observatory. That's been established. So again, why? We don't know why. We don't know whether she was actually doing anything, or whether she was, or whether it was just this really strong identity and this hope that she would be able to do something. After that, it's so sad, between 1909 and 1940 when she died, she lived a very long time. She's described on the census as homemaker. And she obviously never married, never had children, but her brother's children didn't even know that she'd ever been an astronomer when the family was contacted.
this kind of segues, I must wind us up for everyone's comfort, but let the conversation continue in the bar and beyond. We've got lots of feedback forms for you to enable you to do that and to stay in touch. But it segues really nicely onto the question we thought we'd ask you, which is this issue of there is no picture of Annie. So if anybody's got friends in Australia in the astronomy world or the homemaking world or the census world or any leads would be really interesting, wouldn't
Mark
they?
Byrne is actively looking to try and find a photograph of her.
We'd all want to see her, I think.
Yeah.
And the other lead, which I'm sure the company would appreciate, is to funds to make the thing happen. So you know how to get in touch, and let everybody know. And a big thank you finally for a really interesting hour. Thank you.